Hi folks, this is All the Fruit. I'm on the island of Gran Canaria in the semi-desert mountains in the southwest of Gran Canaria. And here I want to document the ancient almond culture. The almonds were basically the most important cash crop of the people in those poor mountains and are still a defining part of their culture and mentality. The Tejeda Almond Blossom Festival is the biggest folk festival in all of the Canary Islands with hundreds of thousands of visitors. Well, if you look around, this looks like quite a poor countryside. The whole southwest of Gran Canaria is pretty much semi-desert. Not many people living here. And well, we tend to imagine that people in Europe, in the Mediterranean, also in the Canary Islands, that their cash crops in older times used to be mostly grains. Well, yes, this is true, but in the mountains it was different. There are actually a couple tree-based cash crops and main staples in the mountains of Europe, the Mediterranean and surrounding areas, like in places with acidic crystalline soil and not too harsh winters. It was the chestnuts, like in the high mountains of the Canary Islands. In places with, often with very harsh winters, not necessarily, but in areas all the way up to Scandinavia and to Russia, it was the hazelnut. In areas with better soil and slightly milder climates than the hazelnut, it was the walnut. And in dry conditions with mild winters, it was usually the almond. And since Gran Canaria has an oceanic climate, even 1,000 meters above sea level, the climate is pretty mild. The winters are pretty mild. This is one day before Christmas now. And I was working topless most of the time. Well, in those dry areas with quite mild winters, it's usually the almond. Well, the valley of Tejeda has millions of sweet almond trees and probably tens of millions of feral bitter almonds. When the sweet almonds reproduce, they produce mostly bitter almonds. Well, basically this giant almond growing place where hundreds of thousands of people come in spring to look at the almond flowers is behind those hills here, the upper part of the valley. However, about 100 square kilometers of Gran Canaria burned down this summer. And about half of this area were those ancient almond groves. Here, as you can see, I'm in the middle of nowhere, semi-desert mountains all around me. And that's the reason the fire did not reach here. It just didn't have enough stuff to burn to reach here. And that's why this little valley in the middle of nowhere, with one single ancient homestead, which was most probably based on goats and almonds, survived. There is an ancient house a couple hundred meters this way. There are a couple other fruit and other useful trees around the house, and hundreds and maybe even thousands of almonds. Much more than a family can eat, so I'm sure that they brought them down to the harbor. And from the harbors of Gran Canaria, they were exported to Spain and throughout the world. Well, as you can see here, the almonds are being grown basically on barren rock. You cannot grow grains on those rocks. You can graze goats, what they still do in those semi-desert mountains, but in areas with a little bit moister air or in some valley bottoms, they have almonds. Now let's look around. I tried a couple of the almond trees before. Here on this side, by the way, there is some soil. So I guess here the almond trees, which are growing quite far apart, were growing on some grain terraces. So here there was some wheat for the support of the family. Look at this tree here. It's quite young. By the way, the bark of all those trees is black, so there must have been a fire here several years ago, but it seems the trees, most of them survived it. A lot of them died or are half dead. I don't know if because of the fire or because we had many years of drought now. I mean, almonds might sustain semi-desert climate, but too much or too little water is too little. So, look at this tree. It's not young, it must be a couple decades old, could even be older than me, I'm not sure. But I tried the fruit, and it's definitely a feral bitter tree. That's what the fruit look like. Or at least the seeds, that's what the seeds look like. Yeah, bitter. Don't eat bitter almond, folks. 7 are enough to kill a little child. And that's why they are sold in many countries in packages of 5. So here is a bigger, older tree. In the lower parts there were even bigger trees, over 1/2 meter thick. Let's try the fruit of this. No, I cannot reach them. Okay. Let's go down to the valley bottom. By the way, if you look around, now there is a road nearby, so you can reach this place after like 1.5 hours of hiking. But before this road was made, you needed like 5 hours, half a day to come to here. And still, they had so many almonds that I'm sure they exported them to pay their taxes and to get a little bit money for the bare necessities they need even here at the fringe of civilization. So this is an older tree. I actually planned to do this video somewhere. Well, this is the fruit. It's basically like a very dry peach. This is the hard kernel of the fruit. And this is the sweet seed. I was planning to do this video somewhere up in Tejeda, among millions and millions of nice sweet almond. Among millions and millions of almond trees, but now I have to do it in this remote part because the big groves, which were too old and dying for decades now without much care, well, most of them have been finished off by the recent fire. And I'm glad I found this little remote valley, which did have some fire a couple years ago, sorry. Don't climb and film, and don't climb and film and talk, but it got spared by the recent fire. I wanted to show you one of the really old trees here, and I wanted to show you how they grow basically almost on bare rock in those semi-desert mountains. This is basically an oasis among those barren slopes. Here is a bit of soil, but really not too much. As you can see, the trees grow in those pockets of soil. Probably there were some rubble walls protecting them, but the goats broke everything down. Let's see. Here is a nice ancient almond tree. I don't know how old those trees are. Almonds are not among the fastest growers, but not among the slowest growers either. Look at this tree. It's one of the biggest. Well, it's not big. The stem is barely 2 meters tall. Let's look at it. The stem is, maybe 2 meters 20 tall. But it is about, well, judge for yourself. It's slightly taller than me. So it's 2 meters, about 2 meters 10, 2 meters 20, about 7 feet tall. About half as wide. Look at it, almost, I would say almost a meter wide. 95 centimeters wide. Here it has broken down The ancient crown of this tree has broken down and a couple new branches have regrown in the last decades. It kind of got more or less spared by the fire a couple years ago, and the whole valley here got spared by the fire this summer. The fruit are nice and big. Maybe the quality of the local almonds decreased with time because the younger trees, even the planted ones, don't have such big fruit. Maybe they did not have someone to graft them or what. This is strange. Very unexpected. Those big fruit are bitter. Those big almonds are bitter. Why did they go through so much trouble to plant a bitter almond tree here? Let's try this again. I picked those from the old tree. Bitter. Really big fruit for this area, but bitter. How come the fruit of the biggest and oldest tree are bitter? So I guess what happened is that this was a grafted tree. The crown with the graft died. This was probably the graft. I guess maybe it was grafted here at this level. Don't know where it was grafted here. Let's see, it would be really funny if this almost dead branch had sweet almonds. Let's try this. So now one almond from this old branch, which is part of the dying crown and not of the younger. Bitter. Either this place was abandoned decades ago, so that this thick branch grew from the rootstock, or they actually had almond trees with bitter almonds here. Interesting. I'm sure there are still a few old people who can solve a lot of the mysteries of those ancient almond groves for me. Well, folks, this is an almond grove very few people have seen during the last years or even decades. I hope you will forgive me the long video, but since those almonds are really a defining part of the inhabitants of this valley system, I wanted to make a video. Enjoy what's left of the beautiful ancient almond groves of Tejeda. Enjoy the beautiful desert mountains of the southwest of Gran Canaria. Stay tuned for a lot more fruit videos from the remote farms and homesteads of Gran Canaria. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.